Okay. Excuse me. I forgot something. I'm not tearing anything up. Thanks for those sound effects, Greta. I really appreciate it. Okay. Yes, I'm reading you the story. Yeah, I'm sure. I figured it'd make your day. So, okay. So this is it. It goes, Keeper of the Spring is a story that the late Peter Marshall loved to tell. He was an eloquent speaker and for several years served as the chaplain of the U.S. Senate. The story is a tale of a quiet forest dweller who lived high above an Austrian village along the eastern slope of the Alps. The old gentleman had been hired many years earlier by a young town councilman to clear away the debris from the pools of water up in the mountain crevices that fed the lovely spring flowing through their town. With faithful, silent regularity, he patrolled the hills, removed the leaves and branches, and wiped away all the silt that would otherwise have choked and contaminated the fresh flow of water. The village soon became a popular attraction for vacationers. Graceful swans floated along the crystal clear spring. The mill wheels of various businesses located near the water turned day and night. Farmlands were naturally irrigated, and the view from the restaurants were picturesque beyond description. Years passed. One evening, the town council met for a semi-annual meeting, and as they reviewed the budget, one man's eye caught the salary figure being paid the obscure keeper of the spring. Said the keeper of the purse, "Who is this old man? Why do we need him on year after year? No one ever sees him. For all we know, the strange ranger of the hills is doing us no good. He isn't necessary any longer." By a unanimous vote, they dispensed with the old man's services. For several weeks, nothing happened. By early autumn, the trees began to shed their leaves. Small branches snapped off and fell into the pools, hindering the rushing of sparkling water. One afternoon, someone noticed a slight yellowish-brown tint in the spring. A few days later, the water was much darker. Within another week, a slimy film covered sections of the water along the banks, and a foul odor was soon detected. The mill wheels moved more slowly. Some finally ground to a halt. Swans left, as did the tourists. Clammy fingers of disease and sickness reached deeply into the village. Quickly, the embarrassed council called a special meeting. Realizing their gross error in judgment, they rehired the old keeper of the spring, and within weeks, the veritable river of life began to clear up. The wheels started to turn, and new life returned to the hamlet in the Alps. And the verse, above all, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. The question is how are we handling or how are we caring for the spring? Because that is the basis of a lot of what you guys hear from me hounding students about all the time is how is your heart? How are you taking care of it? Because whatever flows out of that is what affects other people, whether relationally or emotionally or even from a intellectual point of view and encouraging people. We need to use various aspects of that in very sparing ways because of just how powerful it actually is. So the spring needs a keeper of the spring, and you're it. You're it. And so when we talk about boundaries, we talk about it as a fence that is around that particular spring to care for it so that not everybody comes in and decides to do what they want with it. And that's the issue, ultimately, when we talk about boundaries and why it is so important, and why healthy relationships really revolve around it. Because without those, quite honestly, you cannot have intimacy without good boundaries. You can't. Because if the other person is me, then how much intimacy am I going to have? There's no distinction between me. So any good relationship has individuality and unity in it, not one or the other. It always has two. And that's what boundaries make possible, is they define, as we said, it defines our soul, it defines me and not me, and it defines even how I go about helping other people. And how do I respond? Do I encourage and cheerlead for them to take the responsibilities that are rightfully theirs? Or do I walk alongside and carry it with them like a boulder that's too big for them to carry alone? And so there's a lot of this that revolves around that issue in particular, is the boundaries issue. And why I make such a big deal out of it, because all the years I've spent talking to people, all roads lead back to two main issues: control and boundaries, far and away, far and away. And so that is part of why I'm making such a big deal of this, and why I cherry pick it out of my dimensions of relationship, because I take out of there, the boundaries is the only one I pick out of there to talk about in this class and the other classes that have groups in them, because you can't have a good group without people having decent boundaries. It is the place to learn how to have them. So if there are some profiles we go through today that you're going, oh boy, that sounds a little too familiar, that's what labs are for, otherwise known as groups. That's how we learn. And you can be absolutely assured I will point it out. Now, that may be really uncomfortable. I do it with as much grace as possible, but y'all add the shame. I don't. You add it to your own change, or things that you're being quote unquote called out about. You add the shame. Your speaker may not be at all. And that's the problem, because I can tell you this: when I've done groups before, I've pointed certain patterns out, and I can literally watch in the person's face how they're sinking into this pit of shame, because they quit listening. Shame creates a wall between us and the person who's trying to walk alongside and help us. And that's what happens. That's what shame does. It's isolating. It is safe in our isolation, but it is still isolating. It makes it no less isolating. So what I want to do is take you through, briefly at least, 4 different styles of handling boundaries, okay? And no one person, just like we did with the safe people stuff, I said at that time, no one person is all 100% safe, and no one person is one of these, ever. It will depend on the nature of the relationships they're in, what history they've developed, and those kinds of things that actually contribute to the level of safety. So before I get into that, though, let me point a couple things, one thing out, and that is some examples of boundaries. One of the very first ones is literally what makes us distinct, right? Is our skin itself. Imagine, I doubt anyone can, we can in small ways. Imagine what it's like to walk around without skin. It would take the tiniest thing to touch that, and you've probably had it before, like exposed skin, or you fell on a bike or had some other injury. It is excruciating in pain. And that's what it's like for people that don't have boundaries, is everything hurts, because there is no differentiation between them and the world around them, essentially. Words, the most hated word in our vocabulary, is the smallest word in our vocabulary, and that is no. No. And we don't like the word, and we don't like to use it, and we don't like to have it used on us, either way. So words can be that. Words can delineate differences between us and call somebody else to a decision, or to be clear about my role in whatever the decision making might be. It's both of those things. And then distance. In some cases, with certain relationships, a geographical cure isn't all bad. It gives us some breathing distance from the person. And so you see people, having something happen or having a relationship, and they look for a job in some other city, because that's the best way to get away from being reminded of the relationship, because of the associative learning that goes into it. And so we move away. The problem with geographical cures, I'm going to cough. is that we have to take ourselves with us. You don't? We have to take us with us. And that's where, and so we kind of overlook, and we end up deflecting all the responsibility onto the other person. If this hadn't happened, I would be. And so we go to a new location, emotionally or otherwise, and guess what? It happens again. Because I'm not changing my patterns, I'm just looking for other people to change their patterns. And so, of course, and time. And there's something to be said for time. Just remember, time does not heal all wounds. If anything, it makes it worse, if we actually believe that. Time heals wounds if I do something with the time. That's the only way time helps. Yes, ma'am?
Do you not think that sometimes God separates us from people with time and distance?
So God separates people? It depends on how you're defining God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I'll give you, I was surrounded by really bad people. I also was a horrible person. And
Wait, what? You were what? If you're going to walk out of this plank, I got to hear it, Rachel.
no, not like that. You're not a horrible person. I was not acting to my fullest potential as a child of God. How was that?
That's a diplomatic or cloaked way of saying something else, but I'll let you continue.
Okay. Basically, I became a believer, and I didn't have a choice over these friendships, and I lost all of those friendships. And at the moment, it was crushing to me because I was like, "This is horrible."
Right.
I lost all my friends. I look back on that, and I'm so grateful I'm not still friends with them.
Right.
It was horrible. They're now 900 miles away, and 3 or 4 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm so much better for it.
So, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
You said I didn't have a choice. What does that mean?
There were situations that happened. Okay, so I became a Christian.
Right.
Saved. I'm not even kidding. A month later, and I went back to school.
Mm-hmm.
Situations arose that what came out of nowhere.
Right.
That I didn't have control over, and all my friends, out of nowhere, dropped me. Out of nowhere.
Because of that situation?
Not because I became a Christian. There were other things that kind of came up that somebody started this rumor out of nowhere about me, about some situation
Mm-hmm.
that was not true, and it crushed me because
Mhm.
it's you're trying to yell in the air this is not true,
Right.
and I just so in some way, shape, or form, I didn't have a choice over that,
Mm-hmm.
and if it was my choice at that time, I would have stayed friends with them,
Okay.
and they was still my people, or somebody, I was just.
So, I mean, in a sense, you never really learned how to have boundaries with unsafe people.
Now I have.
Oh, that's so much better.
But I understand, I see now why.
Right.
If I say that was maybe God protecting me, I would appreciate it. But that was distance and time. There's still part of me that still feels somewhat of a heartbreak.
Right.
A distant heartbreak.
Yeah.
Past. But it's seeing the life lesson of wow, the way those people treated me and the way I treated them as well
Mhm.
is not perfect in those relationships. And now the friendships that I have, I'm oh my goodness, the difference between these is astronomical. And I didn't realize that at the time.
Yeah.
You guys wanted me to. But
Yeah.
it wasn't my choice. So.
Yeah, the situation wasn't. How you related to them was. And that really set it up for that kind of thing. And this is not a case of shoulda, coulda, woulda kind of thing. It's just the reality is that, as I said, you end up not really learning anything. You just move to another place, and it creates the barrier or the boundary for you. Now, is there something to be said for that? Yes, but there's no re-entry to practice what you're learning. There's no testing, if you will, around that. So I think, if I had my druthers, it would be not somebody to escape, but to deal with the situation with a new sense of direction as far as boundaries are concerned. That doesn't always work. There are a variety of circumstances that lead us away, like you're describing, lead us away from that situation. And then we have a sense of clarity about how destructive that situation was, for sure. We still have, this is not applicable to you, but we still have residential facilities where teenagers go to get away from their family to buy enough time to figure out what's all theirs, not what's wrong with their family, but what's all theirs, and to interact with their family very differently. And so there's something to be said for that, absolutely, except where do I practice then after that? Because I have very mixed feelings about quote unquote turning over a new leaf kind of stuff, because the old backside of the leaf is still there. And if I don't do something to renew that, then I'm going to take that with me into the new situation. To some degree, my hunch is we bring patterns with us because it's us, and we're not even seeing them. We just don't see them at all. And that's kind of what this example is about. In theory I agree. I think practically I probably have, I have misgivings about just escaping the situation, never going back, creating a kind of a new me, if you will, but then what's learned from back there. Now, it may be almost impossible to learn it when I'm in that situation. I get that. But at the same time, it's like those patterns are still going to come. They're still going to be here. They're still going to be part of our relationship. We may have, the Christianese to wrap around it, but there's still unhealthy patterns. That's why boundaries is still an issue.
So what do you think that situation happened, let's just say starting point from that situation I didn't have control over, what's the next thing that you would do in order to then, okay, now I saw how that situation went and those people treated me and how that was completely no boundaries for anything.
Right.
Now I'm like, okay, I should create boundaries. If I want to change, I want to move on, I want to grow.
Right.
Creating boundaries. Where does that start?
Well, and I think you engage with a different group of people, a different community, but doing it in that environment is tough. So, if we're talking about teenagers, that's really hard. It is really hard. I still remember a girl that I treated in the hospital, and she had gotten pregnant, and she came to our inpatient treatment facility, and she had, like you're describing, kind of all the bad friends, which is partly what led up to her getting pregnant. And and the longer that we talked and the longer we worked together, she began to see that. Well, she went back into that, and it was a good 6 months while she was trying to turn over her friend group from the destructive ones to ones that would support and encourage the kind of changes she was trying to make. It was 6 months. In adolescent time, that's 6,000 years. That she was basically alone. She wasn't accepted by any group, either group, really. And her story is really pretty remarkable now that I look back on it. She had the baby. I had treated her in Illinois. She lived in Minnesota. She moved back to Illinois to have the baby and then give it up for adoption, and then move back. The thing that just boggles my mind, but also makes me feel really, really old, is that she has 3 children, and they're all in high school, the age of when I started treating her. But she's a remarkable woman and a great mom because she made that sacrifice of living in that limbo in high school, which is by no means easy. It's only gotten worse, and persisting in it, And we would have regular telephone counseling. We didn't have Zoom or anything like that. And made just some remarkable changes. That would be the best because it's battle tested. We just escape, and then we say, well, I'm glad that's over, and not really learn anything at all. And she had to learn it on the fly, even under those circumstances. So if you ever come into my office, I actually have a needle point that her mom made me about the relationship I had with her in 1994. Anyway. Oh, gee, thanks, Greta. I feel so much better.
Don't patronize.
I'm not. I am, but I'm not. I am, but I'm not.
After I said not to patronize, you would still,
Yeah. I can't wait to get you a group. Okay, so some examples. Some examples in the boundaries issues. All right, there are 4 different kinds, and like I said, no one person is one of these. I've relabeled them, so if you've heard this presentation before, Lyric, or anybody else that's heard it before, I've relabeled these to make them more understandable. Quite honestly, just to be, What?
you just relabeled it because you knew people heard it before and you just wanted to make it more exciting.
I would call it exciting. It just make them more attentive, maybe more than anything. So, right, Zoe? You've been down this path before. She's got her computer closed. She's not even going to take notes on it. Okay. Yeah. Oh, you think you have? Okay. So, the first group of people are the ones that I call the go along to get along folks. They say yes to the bad. Now, they may not identify it as bad. Have I shamed you into taking notes now? Is that how that works? Yeah, you added that yourself. So, they say yes to bad. They have fuzzy and indistinct boundaries. And the delusion that they operate under is that the only way to have connection is to minimize my differences with other people. The only way to have connection. And what drives it along, the ultimate cause, is fear. Now, fear is a cause of a lot of things. But the go along to get along folks would fall in the extreme, would fall into a term I know a lot of you guys know, and that's codependency. Is if you're happy, I'm happy. And so the boundaries are very diffuse. And indistinct, and you as me and me as you, and so there's no individuality between these. When I talk about the profiles of, or 5 different kind of styles of relationship, the one of the styles that I talk about is called the eggshell relationship. And what I mean by that is literally if you think of 2 individuals as circles, there is so much overlap between them that the relationship breaks really easy, because if one person pulls away, the other person is already screaming about it and saying, no, come back. I don't know where I am if I don't have this relationship. So these people can easily get held hostage in a relationship and act in such a way that they only comply with the image the other person has. They don't ever explore what the image is they have of themselves. So, and that's what happens when you have no fence, or you have a very rickety fence, if we're going to use that metaphor, then pretty much everything gets through, and you're not real sure what's mine and what's not mine. It's like, whatever you say it is what I am. So the goal on the get along folks are really very driven by that. The interesting thing about this, and we'll talk about the one other category of people, is how much they are the literal mirror image of the other category. And I'll introduce you to it in a minute. Because they are driven by control as well. And the way that they keep people close is being whatever they want them to be. So it's implicit control. It's not dominating control. It is, I'll make it easier for you to stay kind of control. And that's codependency too. Codependents are doing everything they can because they got to have the relationship with the person who's dependent. That's where we get that phrase. They have to have that relationship. They do everything they can to make the world and life emotionally easy for the other person, rather than allowing the person to actually suffer consequences. So the fear underlying it, usually control is our response to fear. That's usually the background to that. So the fear is still the engine underneath it. The second group of people is the yeah, but people. And they say no to the good. So people offer to help them. And they'll often say, yeah, but my problem's not that big compared to someone else or relative to someone else. And so they relativize their problem to a point where it is thoroughly insignificant. And so they have a really rough time asking for help. And you know, if I were to say at one point in time what I was the poster child of, it was the first one, quite honestly. I was the go along to get along so that I could stay in relationship with people. Now that changed a lot over time, obviously, but the one that still is one that I'm fighting down is this yeah, but. Because it may not be relativizing my problem, but it may be that I just have a hard time asking for help. I'll give you a very current example. Go ahead, Larry.
The go along, get along, similar to people pleasing? Similar to people pleasing.
People pleasing, yes, it is. It is very much so. Now, my current example over the weekend, we went camping with my two grandsons. One's 8 and the other's 5. And my wife, in all of her wisdom, decided we were going to take a hike up a mountain. And you hear the cough, right? My lungs are already slightly compromised. And so I thought, yeah, that'll be fine. And so we start tromping up, and we were up to 10,000 feet. And there was a point in time where I said, I can't go any farther. I have nothing left. And that admission is the worst for me. I don't like saying that at all. And if there was a fight this weekend over shame, it was sitting on a stump and thinking, I should be able to do that. I should be, and the last 500 feet was literal boulder climbing. I don't know how my wife did it. I honestly don't. My 8-year-old grandson, he's like a mountain goat. So he just kind of climbs up over everything. By the time they got up, it was about a 500-foot elevation gain from where I was. And I was already having trouble. I look back on my Apple Watch and find out that was the beginning of AFib for me, atrial fibrillation. I started into it Saturday night, woke up in the morning with a full-fledged version of it at my heart beating 170 beats per minute. And I thought I was feeling better when it got down to 110. And I had all the symptoms and everything about all of that. You know, all of it went back to, I should have just gone back and not kept going. I just kept my mouth shut. And I didn't want to say that I was limited. And there was not a chance we were going to catch sight of any wildlife because I was coughing the entire way up. And it was like, oh, geez, this is awful. I tell my grandsons, be quiet at the fort. It's like, this is great. Do as I say, don't do as I do. So for a lot of people, the boundaries they have are walls. They're impenetrable. They don't come out. They don't ask for help. And even when somebody says, can I help you? They'll say, no. They might say, yeah, but by relativizing it, these come in a lot of different flavors when it comes right down to it. So they go along to get along, the yeah, but people. And then the next one is it it's all about outcome people. Now, this category is broken down into two parts. So it's people that are focused on getting a particular outcome. And whenever we're driven to gain an outcome, we will ignore the relationship. We will ignore the relationship. So when I got to get something done, all I need is when I tell somebody to do it, they do it. And some of it is because that's my exercise of power. So in their economy, no is a challenge to overcome. And they cajole and influence and do all manner of things to talk the person out of saying no. Ultimately, they end up resisting taking responsibility for their own lives. They're off-putting. They're deflecting it to other people in that regard. And then they are projecting responsibility onto other people. It's your job to help me do this or accomplish this. So that's the big category, all right? The outcome people. What the means or the ends justify the means kind of people. They would fit into that category as well. So it breaks down into two different categories. The first one is the one that everybody can see a mile away are the intimidators. They don't listen. They run over fences like no is not acceptable. They sometimes will escalate or at least threaten escalation to get people to do what they want them to do. It's not like they're actually following through on it. They're implying that. And most of the time, the people that are in relationship with these folks are already anticipating. And that's why they never say no. Because if I say no, they say to themselves, they'll leave, one, or they'll come, quote unquote, come after me, or they'll start berating me, or any number of things. Now, they may have plenty of evidence to support that, but that's not a reason to cave in on the boundaries. If anything, it's more firm to be about boundaries. So there's no place for somebody to say no. They aren't even aware of boundaries. The funny thing about it is whenever I talk about this, even to groups, the biggest critics, remember safe people, the biggest critics come up and they're these people. And most of the time the examples they give me are what if, and then they give me an example of somebody who's supposed to follow through on something they gave to them, and then they escalate. And in many, many, many cases, there's always a justification for the level of control they try to exercise over people. It's not about choice. It is never about choice with these folks, ever. And that's the key thing to keep in mind. Remember when we were talking about safe people, they encourage choice. They encourage freedom. Controllers do not. And intimidators in particular do not. Again, and they will ramp up very, very, very fast. So fast that people are really quite frightened of them, and so they just simply comply so that they don't have to face the consequences of the person's implied anger. Now, they may have shown it. I'm not saying they haven't, because intimidators are a pretty good road toward verbally abusive, physically abusive types of stuff. And again, you can get people to comply by threatening physical abuse. You don't even have to do anything. You can just put that out there, and either somebody's going to say, "Hasta la vista, baby," or they leave, or they will comply. It's just a matter of how this works out. So intimidators is one subgroup of outcome people. Okay. Second group is the manipulators. And the thing to keep in mind about this is manipulators are far less honest than intimidators are, which sounds odd, right? But intimidators, you know where you stand. You know, always know what the issue is because they're going to let you know and usually try to use it as leverage to get you to do what they want them to. So they're less honest. Again, they don't accept no for an answer either, but they try to persuade and influence and manipulate the circumstances in such a way that the person actually thinks they're making a choice when they're not. And that's part of this. It's very much a part of this. Manipulators, a lot of times people don't realize they're manipulating. And some of that is, you'd say, well, that's relatively innocent. They're not aware. And that may be. I mean, a lot of times we grow up even in families that have manipulation patterns in them that we don't even recognize. And we throw out the emotional capital to people. And it's like, well, if you want this, I'll give you that. And so the trades start flying, and and they're pretty sure that you're going to choose the way they want you to, and you just don't know it yet. That's kind of what manipulators tend to do or say. So outcome people, intimidators, manipulators are the subcategories within it. And then the last group is, what's your problem? They don't hear the needs of other people at all. They're the ones that live by this, and this is not uncommon to have a crossover point between these guys and the critics we talked about in Safe People. If you don't like how you feel, change your feelings. Life's tough. Get over it. In some of my oldest daughter's more cynical times, it was, cry me a bridge and build a river, or build a bridge. Cry me a river and build a bridge and get over it. That was her motto. It really was. And so that's this aspect. Their job is to critique people. And it's a self-appointed job. It's not a other appointed one at all. And ultimately, they're absorbed in their own desires and needs and the impact other people have on them. And they don't like it. And so they push it off on other people. And they kind of lay this card out on other people in a lot of different ways. And so a couple of Job's counselors are very much in this camp. At least two of them. So the critical spirit that we found when we were talking about the critic and the safe people material is also present in the boundaries problems. And these are specific boundary areas. Like I said, with the safe people, it may change depending on the relationship you're in and what role you actually play in that regard. Yes, ma'am.
This kind of goes back to like the first one, the go along to get along
Yeah.
or whatever. So like with that and like codependency and stuff like that, is there like a situation where like a codependent relationship can like be healed without just like having to completely sever the relationship? And like, cause like I'm just trying to think of even like people that I've known in my life that had that, and I feel like I've never like seen that end up healed where like they can remain in a relationship without just having to like completely not be in a relationship anymore. Like what do you do about like a relationship that has become codependent, and like is there a way to like keep that relationship? Obviously like setting boundaries is important, but like if it's already been codependent, is there a way to like just be in like healthy relationship without just having to like?
But it requires the other person's cooperation.
Yeah.
And they are not going to be cooperative. If they're in a relationship with somebody in the go along to get along category, life has been great. And so the other person, because you can say, can that relationship be directed toward a healthy direction? Well, you really need both people on that board rather to make that possible. And I'll give you an example. Many years ago when I was starting my private practice, I had a woman come in, and she was the wife of a very prominent attorney where I was in a surrounding town outside of Wheaton, Illinois. And so where I was doing my practice was Geneva, and she was in Wheaton. And her husband was very well known. He was running for election of something. And she came to me and was very much of a go along to get along person. And we started talking, and she started setting firmer and firmer boundaries. And before too long, guess who shows up in my office? A very well-known attorney, to talk me out of what I was doing with his wife, because it interfered with his designs to being in control of everything. And so, and literally, I don't think he said it literally, but it was like, I don't know who this person is, but it sure isn't the wife I married. And some of it is because their entire relationship had gotten calibrated around no boundaries at all. And his just, suck the air out of room kind of personality. And she just was the retiring, flower in the corner that was a trophy wife, more or less. And so you can make changes in systems like that by working with one person, but they have limited power to some degree in affecting the entire system unless that other person comes along. So they can make those changes. So going to your example, about the only way that they end up seeing to set limits on the behaviors of the other person is to sever the relationship. That's the only way to do that, because the person would never cooperate with learning new ways to handle boundaries and to be respectful and to allow choice and freedom and all those kinds of things. And he wasn't. He really wasn't. He was sure that he was going to convince me to, resurrect the woman that he had married. And, it's no going back once somebody learns about what healthy behavior and healthy relationships are like, unfortunately. Yeah, they did. And very quiet. You don't easily get a divorce in Wheaton. So, yeah.
How would you deal with someone who kind of falls into like the manipulative boundaries kind of person, but is in denial of it? Especially if they're like your family, so you can't like.
Oh boy.
You can't like put big distance between it.
Hypothetical. Somebody else's family I know of, right?
But then like whenever you express like, hey, that kind of hurt me, they like guilt trip you for feeling that way.
Well, now there's two sides to that coin, okay? If I give somebody honest feedback about how their behavior or what they had to say hurt, and then they turn it around on, it's my problem, that's where I have power, okay? Because the only way you're going to go on a guilt trip is if you go with the person. Somebody who's trying to guilt trip somebody, actually it's shame trip somebody. If somebody's trying to do that, the only way that they can have that work is an accomplice. And that's us. So somebody can guilt trip you and say, I don't know how it goes. There's always a script that they always follow, but and they'll say, how dare you say something like that, and I didn't mean it, or things like that. And it's like, I don't care. I'm just giving you feedback. You can do whatever you want with the feedback I'm giving you, but I don't have to feel guilty for giving you feedback. I thought that's what our relationship was built on. Now, their behavior says it wasn't, but that really is the way to do that. It's not easy, far and away, because they just keep escalating the stakes. And guess what? Eventually, if you hold your ground, they're out. You're not out. You're still there, but they're out because you've created consequences for their bad behavior. They don't want to learn. They want to keep doing what they're doing. So in family, obviously, it's a lot more complicated. Particularly if it's parents and you're the kid. Because that power has a long, long reach. It's been part of your growing up years and everything else. So when you start moving in a different direction with better boundaries and clarity and giving feedback and saying no and meaning no and those kinds of things, they're going to have a hard time adjusting to it. They are, if it hasn't been that way all this time. So that probably requires us taking some time to explain our actions to the person, what motivates it. And it's like I've become aware of some of these patterns that I'm in relationship to other people, not what you're doing, but what I'm doing. And so you're probably going to hear no more because I need the practice to do that. And even small things. And it's not that I'm just trying to be contrarian. That's not it at all. It's just I'm finally getting around to being honest. And that's usually what that is about. So, yeah.
A sort of similar scenario, what if you're, like obviously you're learning all these things and growing emotionally, and you do call something out to somebody, and then they just go and rummage through their hurt museum and bring up all the time you did the same thing.
Right.
How do you respond to that?
Yeah, you say you're right. I did. Where's your sword? I mean, really? What are you beating me with? I already agree with you. I mean, actually, scripturally, Paul does that. Because he says, I was the Pharisee of Pharisees. I killed people. And it was like, so what sword are you going to use against me now? Really? What weapon are you going to use? And so actually, in some respects, he's pulling the weapon out of his enemy's hands. Because it's like, been there, done that, got the T-shirt, and went home.
You're also upset about it, so.
Yeah, that's why I'm making these changes, right? So, yeah, Maddie.
Why are some people only codependent in romantic relationships? Like if they're not codependent with friends?
Yeah, and partly because the stakes are higher, right? I mean, the outcomes are that much more important. And so they end up mortgaging themselves in order to have the relationship. And I see this in a lot of young people's relationships, is that they mortgage a lot of things, including even their body, in trade for somebody sticking around. And that's an awful trade. And when it's actually pointed out, it probably is horrifying for both people involved, not just, a lot of guys never have it spelled out for them. You do realize what you're asking of your girlfriend. You're putting her in an impossible situation because either she stays in relationship with you or she goes to bed with you. And so what is that about? And that's about power, bottom line. And it also betrays, I have to use power because I'm afraid that me just as me is really not compelling enough for somebody to be in a relationship with. So now we've got the internal narrative running as well. So I think there's a lot of that. And that's why romantic relationships are usually the ones where you see some of these behaviors. Because other places, it's like I don't have any investment in that, or as much of an investment in it as I do with my romantic relationships. So, yeah.
I think another point to that is what I've noticed is for people who only have those romantic relationships, they're always in romantic relationships. So they don't really go to anybody else because they're always trying to get into a relationship.
Yeah, most people are horrified at my prescription for that. Do you guys know? Do you?
Is this the year thing?
I actually told somebody because they were in that kind of relationship. I'm not going to tell you if it's a male or a female. And I said to them, you have to be out of relationship for 18 months, continuously. I had to qualify because, add 6 and 6 and 6, and he's still good. And long about the 11th month, the person was really, really struggling. Why? Because they were always in relationship with somebody else, and that's how they figured out who they were. So now they had to figure out how to, in a sense, invest in themselves and who they are. Because the one thing you'll hear me say over and over, you cannot give away what you don't own. If you don't own your heart, you cannot give it away. You can't. We can make it look like it, but it's just parts. It really is. So, okay, anything else? So if you put this on a grid, just so you can see the relationships, because this shows up a little bit more clearly. So the people that can't say no, I think we all know, go along to get along. The people who can't say yes, I should have done the other side, sorry. Who can't hear no are the outcome people. Now the thing to keep in mind is these two up here is a match made in hell. And controllers are looking for the go along to get along people. It's a perfect complement. Just like that lady I told you about. It's a perfect complement. And so it can be very much of a stable relationship. And stable does not equate with healthy. In a lot of cases, you see the healthiest families, oftentimes on the surface, look the most unstable. Because people are free to let themselves be known as they are in it. And that's not easy. It's never easy. So, go along to get along, can't say no. And the controllers, the outcome-driven people, can't hear no. You go to lower and can't hear yes, the yeah, but people. And the ones that can't say yes are what's your problem? People. And so you see quite naturally when you have can't say and can't hear, it makes perfect sense. They work together perfectly. I can't say no and you don't want to hear no, so we're good. And it often fits into what I call how many of you guys have had family dynamics already? Is the word perichoresis. Did that ever get defined? Yep, the round dance. And every relationship develops a dance. Everyone, even dysfunctional ones do. And so the dysfunctional ones oftentimes I'll refer to as a porcupine relationship. And what I mean by that is that a porcupine on a cold winter's night, because when they get too far apart and there's not enough warmth and they get cold, but if they get too close together, they poke one another. And so what they do is they find just the right distance to keep from poking one another, but have enough warmth to survive. And that's those relationships. The dance of, I don't think it carries with it too many negative connotations, although it is negative. And that's the dance of codependency, the dance of control and power. And that's one of those reasons why I say all the time, control and trust cannot coexist. If I'm gonna control somebody, then I'm already telling them or telescoping to them, I don't trust you. Now, we may not mean that, but that's fairly irrelevant. They'll hear it. They'll hear it every time. You get micromanaged by a supervisor, what are they saying? I mean, yeah, essentially they're saying you can't do your job. I've got to do it for you. That's what micromanagement is. So there's no trust. And they end up tinkering around in places, and they never are one to train people. Because training requires trust. If I'm going to train somebody, I got to trust them to make mistakes and to leverage those mistakes so they get better at what they do. That's all part of the deal, really, when it comes to training. So, and you might put it in a broader perspective as far as even leadership. Is leadership has that same kind of style. You can have the control-based leaders and the kind of learning-based or process-based leaders. So, any questions? Yes, sir.
So the outcome-driven people, would you say the military attracts that type of people, or the military breeds that type of people?
Yes.
Cool.
I mean, it's a lot of people that are not as highly conventional, structured people are going to self-limit. They're not going to go into that at all. So you already have a self-limited group of people that are applying to be part of the military. So it is very conventional. The thing is what's lurking in the military is not necessarily control. It's order, but it's not control. I mean, the best organization has some measure of order in it, not controlling people just by predictability and clarity. So in that sense, the military is not necessarily a control organization. Now, can you get controllers that are in higher levels of leadership? Yeah, but you can get that here. That's not unique to the military. So, what else? Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
I could just be missing this, but are you saying that people who have these boundary problems are a part of an unsafe people group? Or are you just...
Not necessarily. I mean, you'll see any one of these in that thing we were talking about with safe and unsafe people. But they're not necessarily. I think you can pick the general population and you'll find a particular style. And I think these might be better understood in terms of relationship style than people themselves. So, yeah. Okay, well, all of the preface is over. On Wednesday, we start diving into the grace, shame and grace stuff. My plan is to launch the groups on the first week of October. So we'll get the logistics worked out for getting people where they have to be or need to be. And I will continue to just, if any flexibility can be had, that's great. It's just so we can keep the groups at a reasonable amount, but sometimes you just can't, and I understand that. So we'll figure it out in the next 2 weeks, and then we'll be ready to roll. When that happens, lectures will only be on Monday. And then groups will be throughout the rest of the week. Okay? All right, see ya.